Okay, yeah, I see you. You all saw the handout notes there. So, yep, talk about teaching from the Psalms tonight. I really enjoy helping people get a better idea of what's going on in the Psalms, helping people learn how to get more out of the Psalms as they read them and study them. Um, So let me ask you a question here to start this off. When you're reading some piece of literature in English, what are the telltale like structural signs that tell you I'm reading a poem? Yeah, yeah. Rhyme. Yeah, we find rhyming words usually. Yeah, kind of a flow, kind of a rhythm to it, usually like a steady beat of some kind. Yeah. Yep. Probably maybe the only other one that comes real quickly to mind would be like figures of speech. A lot of things like similes or metaphors or some of that flowery kind of language sometimes that we don't always see in other parts of literature. Yeah, that those are kind of the telltale signs of poetry in English, at least. Well, in the Old Testament, and of course, the Old Testament was first written in Hebrew. The main structural feature of Hebrew poetry is called parallelism. That's your first fill in there. You can see that word spelled out just below in the next statement down there. Yeah, it's something called parallelism. In the Psalms in the Old Testament, if you certainly in English, we don't see a lot of rhyming words, and that's also true in Hebrew. If you take a look at it in Hebrew, rhyming is not a main feature of the poetry. That rhythm, that steady beat, that's not a common feature of Hebrew poetry either. It's this device called parallelism, which it builds on a close comparison of ideas where the author will introduce some thought, and then whether it's in the very next phrase or two phrases further along or the next verse or something like that, he'll return to that same general thought, but with a very, sometimes it's a very subtle and slight development of his thought. And so this is why oftentimes when we read through the Psalms, we kind of get the feeling that, well, the author seems to be repeating himself almost. It can feel like he's just saying the same thing over and over. Why does he go on and on about this same thought? Well, this is where we're going to find the beauty in the Psalms, is in taking a close look at the comparisons that the author is making in these different phrases and in these different statements. So if you look down there on your notes, you can see I just listed out some types of comparison, or we could call this movement between phrases or development of an idea. And the ones I listed here are just examples. There would be probably many other types of comparison that we'd run into, but some of these will probably even bring certain psalms to your mind as we go through here. So, for example, sometimes the comparison might be spatial. It might be in terms of space. He in one phrase he might mention heaven, another phrase he mentions earth, or it might be near to far, something like that. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted, or something like that. And then it might compare how the wicked are not able to come close to Him, or something like that. So sometimes the comparison might be in terms of space. Sometimes it might be a kind of a logical comparison. Maybe he mentions something, just a general category of something, and then in the next phrase or next verse, he comes back to the same thought and gets a little bit more specific. We'll see a good example of that when we start looking at Psalm 8 down here in just a minute. Other types might be social status. It might be some comparison between the rich and the poor, or between the mighty and the weak, the powerful and the powerless. So we might see comparisons, contrasting like that. Sometimes, this is a really common category, religious status. There might be some kind of contrast made between the godly and the wicked, or the kind of actions that bring blessing from God versus the kind of actions that bring condemnation from God. Or sometimes it might be a comparison from what is common to what is holy. And I asked you to turn to Psalm 133 because there's a great example of that here in this psalm. Um, One that I've always found to be a little bit comical, and you'll probably see why as we read into this. But Psalm 133, look at how it starts out here. It says, "Behold, how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity. It is like the precious oil on the head, running down on the beard of Aaron." Wow, man, why does he mention the beard of Aaron? And I've thought in my mind, but did he have some kind of like amazing Duck Dynasty style beard or something that was just one of those extremely full beards? But do you have any thoughts why he might have mentioned the beard of Aaron in particular? The next line after that gives us a little reminder why. Any thoughts on maybe why he specifically mentioned Aaron's beard?
My translation, it says priest
Because
of his position.
Okay, yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, because Aaron was the high priest. Yep. And so, he mentions this precious oil on the head. And so when he gets down here to focusing on the beard of Aaron, and then, of course, he goes on to say, running down on the collar of his robes, we understand that, oh, okay, he's not talking about just any old type of oil here. He's talking about the anointing oil, that was used to consecrate people like Aaron and the other priests. And so, okay, so that's why he first mentions running down on the beard and then the beard of Aaron, because he's focusing in on the fact that he's talking about the priest there. Yeah. So that's an example of moving from the common to the holy. First he starts out talking about a beard, doesn't specify anyone's beard in particular, just a common category, and then he zooms in on something that's holy, the priest there. So yeah, that's just one example there of that kind of comparison. But maybe you can start to see how this is where the rubber really meets the road in the Psalms. And so, even just as we're interpreting the Psalms, as we're studying them for ourselves, these are the things that we want to keep an eye out for. But especially then, as we're teaching, we want to bring out some of these subtle developments in the thought. Like that one right there, just going from mentioning beards in general to all of a sudden the beard of one specific individual. It's a subtle shift in the focus, but it's that development that really drives the message of the psalm along. So, all right, look at your notes here with Psalm 8. You might even want to turn to that in your Bible. We're going to focus on verses 3 through 6 because those are just some great examples of this parallelism and this development, this movement in the idea from one phrase to the next. But let me just go ahead and I'll just read. I'll just read this whole thing here. It starts out saying, "O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babies and infants you have established strength because of your foes, to still the enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings, and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth." Now, you might notice there, verse 1 and verse 9, that is just repetition, right? Precise repetition. I mean, it just says the same thing at the beginning of the psalm and then again at the end of the psalm. And so sometimes we do see that as well, just repetition. Psalm 136 is another great example of that, where every other line through there, it's like a refrain or a chorus almost. It uses the same line over and over again as the author talks about things that God did in the history of the people. But look at your notes here, because I took these phrases from verses 3 through 6, and I lined them up on the handout according to the ones that are parallel to each other, the ones that are in this structure of parallelism. And you'll see in verses 3 and 4 at least, and okay, yeah, it holds true in verses 5 and 6 as well, where there's kind of this, we could call it sort of an A B kind of structure, where the first phrase of verse 3 is parallel to the third phrase of verse 3. That's where the comparison or the development is being made. And the second phrase of verse 3 is parallel to the fourth phrase of verse 3. And you can kind of see that in how I laid those out on your handout there. Now, the way that you tell that is just simply looking for the phrases that have a similar idea. Sometimes there will even be similar vocabulary. Like if you look in the middle of that section on your handout, you'll see those phrases, "What is man?" and "the Son of Man." Right, so literally the word man is included in both of those phrases. And you can even see in the next set after that, where it says that you are mindful of him, that you care for him. You can see the similarity between those phrases. And so that's what kind of clues you into the fact that Okay, these are the phrases that are parallel here, where I need to look for that comparison. But let's walk through this a little bit. So under the heading there, Psalm 8, look at that first pair of phrases on the left, where it says, when I look at your heavens, and then the moon and the stars. Now, if you look at that first phrase, and then at the second phrase, what's the development in there? How does he kind of develop the idea or the thought that he introduced in the first phrase? So in the first phrase there, he introduced his topic, when I look at your heavens. Then he comes back and he mentions the moon and the stars. Any thoughts on that?
What is creation and the creator?
Creation and say the second part again.
Creator.
The creator. Okay. Look back up the page just a little ways on your handout. What we really have here is an example of that general to specific kind of comparison that I mentioned up there. Because at first he says, what? When I look at your heavens. He doesn't tell us at first exactly what feature of the heavens is catching his attention. He just kind of mentions in general the heavens. But then he comes back and he gets a little more specific now, doesn't he? He mentions the specific features that are catching his attention, the moon and the stars. All right. So instead of now just thinking about the whole big wide heavens, he's now narrowing the focus. He's drawing our attention to the moon and the stars. What else does that tell us about what time of day he is pondering all of this? It's at night, right? Yeah, it's at night. And so now that he's specified this for us, okay, he's narrowed it down from heavens to moon and the stars. And we read through here, he's just kind of in awe of all this. Now, boy, each and every one of us can probably remember a moment like this that we've had, where we're outside at night. And, just imagine, this was David who wrote this. Just imagine back in that time, there's no electric lights, blocking out the stars or anything like that. Well, just imagine how brilliant the stars must have seemed. And so we've all been in this same kind of position, right? We see the moon and the stars, and we're just in awe of it all. Okay. So that's an example of that general to specific development there. All right. And then, okay, notice, move over to the right side of your handout here to the next two phrases that are in parallel. The work of your fingers, which you have set in place. Okay, the work of your fingers, which you have set in place. Now, I think the comparison here might not jump out at you very quickly. So let me ask you a question to kind of, I think, get your mind on the right track. So notice what part of the body he specifically mentions. Fingers, right? Okay. Now, if you were to accomplish some kind of work with just your fingers, would that be like if you were constructing something, building something with just your fingers? Would that be a very substantial thing? Would it be very strong? Would it be very likely to be long lasting? Again, if we're just thinking about your fingers.
Like knitting and sewing, something detailed, small.
Okay, okay.
Smallest.
Yeah, that'd be an example. Yeah, something small, kind of intricate, perhaps. Yeah, yeah.
Strength. Your fingers aren't strong.
Right, right. It wouldn't necessarily have tremendous strength to it. Yeah, but notice what he says in that second phrase, though. He's referring to God's creation. He says, "Which you have set in place." Yeah, I think that is kind of the avenue that he's trying to draw on. This idea of, for us, a work of just our fingers wouldn't necessarily have a lot of strength to it. But for God, even if he just eh, does something with just his fingers, even that, it's what? Set in place. It's not going anywhere, right? Right. So for God, creation was just child's play, just playing with this, just boop, stars, boop, out here, moon, boop, okay, there we go. Creation was no sweat for him. And so I think that's really kind of the image, the idea that David wants us to get there. Even just the work of God's fingers is set in place. It's sturdy. It's solid. Okay. Then look at the next set of phrases there, back to the left, going down. That next set of phrases. What is man and the Son of Man? Okay, now I'm going to clue you in on something here because the comparison really takes place in Hebrew on these phrases. Because in that first phrase, he uses one term to refer to mankind. And then in the second phrase, where we see the word man, he uses a different Hebrew word to refer to mankind. And that second Hebrew word that he uses is the word Adam. Or for us, what does that look like? Adam. Yeah, Adam. And the interesting thing about this word is that it is actually, in the appropriate context, it is actually the proper name for Adam. So the first man. But it's also a general term for mankind in other contexts, which is how the English translators are kind of taking it here. But there is a possibility that David is trying to intentionally draw our thoughts back to Adam and our connection to Adam, which I think in this case, if you look back up at those different types of comparison, would I think kind of be in this area of like religious status. Because I think the point that David is trying to make here is that, we're not just human beings. Okay, what is man? What is a human being? But we are sons of Adam. We are descendants of the one who sinned against God, introduced the consequences of sin into God's beautiful creation. This creation that God made and set in place, the curse on sin came into it because of the actions of Adam. and we are descended from him. We are his descendants of the one who, brought havoc into God's creation. But even despite that fact, what do those other phrases say here? Over to the right side of your page again, all right? Notice those phrases, that you are mindful of him and that you care for him. Now you can see how those two phrases are very similar. So the development of thought there is going to be between the word mindful and the word care. What do you think he might be trying to emphasize there between mindful and care? Now you might be thinking, boy, that seems like if there's a difference between those two, it seems like a subtle difference. Yeah, that's the point. That's kind of the beauty of this poetic technique here.
If something's important to you, you're going to take care of it.
Okay. And that is kind of the idea, Robbie, here. That the idea of caring for it is a little more intense, I think, than what he means by mindful. Even just being mindful, or in other words, remembering something. It has a certain level of significance, of course, but then caring, I think, is a higher degree of of interest in something and looking out for something. I know when I've taught on Psalm 8 before, I've used the illustration of remembering people who were in your second grade class. I mean, if you rack your brain, you can probably remember some of the classmates that you had in second grade. You can remember them, and while you hope that they're doing well, because you're a kind person, you may not necessarily have a lot of care about them right now. You might not necessarily care about them to a tremendous degree, even though you remember them. I think that's kind of the development of thought here. God not only remembers us, but he cares about us. And that's true even though we are just mere human beings. We are descendants of the one who introduced sin into this world. Even though that's true, God still remembers us and he cares about us. So, yeah, that is a thought that should knock our socks off, that God cares for us. All right, let's get a little more practice at this in the next few phrases there. Okay, so again, in verses 5 and 6, we have kind of this A, B kind of structure. So look at these phrases here. Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. Okay. I kind of tried to emphasize there the words where I think the contrast is found. Yet you've made him a little lower than the heavenly beings. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. Hey, any thoughts there about what kind of comparison is he making? Maybe how, or what? In what way is he developing the thought?
Spatial.
Yes, I think you're right. Because why do you say that, Robbie?
The position of each phrase.
Yeah. he kind of puts us smack in the middle of something, doesn't he? All right, he says, okay, if I look up from my position in creation, I find myself, I'm just a little lower than the heavenly beings. Wow, but if I look down, there's also there's something else down here, because I have dominion over the works of your hands. And so, yeah, it's a spatial development, isn't it? He puts us smack in the middle, and essentially, the point he's driving home is that when we take stock of our place in creation, whether we look up or whether we look down, what we find is significance. Because, as he said, we're just a little lower than the heavenly beings, and yet we're above the works of his hands that he goes on to mention in verses 7 and 8, talking about the animals, our fellow inhabitants of the earth here. So he's put us in dominion over all those things. All right. So yes, very good, very, very good one there. Yeah. So in that comparison, he's highlighting our significance in creation. All right. And then the next phrase is there, and crowned him with glory and honor. You have put all things under his feet. All right, so how do you think the development is moving there?
Social status.
Social status? Okay. Well, why do you pick that one?
If you're crowned, you're definitely the top. The scene is the top of the society.
Okay, sure. Yeah, you're in a high status, right? Yep. Yeah, that very well could be a fine one to pick there. Yep. I think there might also kind of be a spatial element to this one too, because if you think about, okay, where does a crown go on your body? Well, it goes on the head, right? It goes on the top of your body, and then the second line he mentions our feet, the very bottom of the body. And so it's kind of like he's saying, from head to toe, you've given us glory, you've given us honor. So yeah, for this idea, from head to toe, we see the honor that God has given to us. All right. So that gives you a little taste of what this parallelism technique is all about. It just takes these phrases and matches them together. And in some way, there's a little bit of a development of the thought. Now, sometimes, yes, boy, it seems very subtle. But that's kind of the whole point here. it's a subtle development. And because it is subtle, again, that's why it can feel like the author's just repeating himself through here. But maybe you can start to see how, oh, wait a second. No, he's not just repeating himself. He's saying something very similar, but he's adding something to it. He's moving our thoughts in a certain direction. So that's where the richness of the Psalms is to be found, right there in thinking about the comparisons between those phrases. All right, any questions about that before I just give you a couple of teaching tips here to wrap this up for tonight?
would it be important to study the original text, and not really, as our Bible translations accurate enough to depict the Psalms? Is that a tool, primary use tool, you think, or not necessarily? Or how much importance in the original text would you place on the Psalms?
Yeah, studying the original text of the Psalms there. There are some places where it'll give you a little bit more insight. Like, for example, this one over here where I highlighted, you know, two different words for mankind between those phrases. That's one spot where, yeah, it would be hard to spot kind of the development of the idea there just between man and son of man. I mean, you know, there would perhaps be some fruitful comparisons to make there, but yeah, I think it you know it really shines out and stands out when you're able to notice the difference in the word that's used there. But by and large, most of the time, your English translation is going to set you up real well to see the comparisons that are being made there. So, and this also, you know, can be a good encouragement to, you know, try to check with a commentary or something. You know, read a commentary on the passage, because hopefully a commentator, if there was some little detail like this, you know, that would be a really nice nugget for you to know. Hopefully the commentator is going to bring that out for you. So. All right. Well, I know I've just kind of dipped your toes into this whole idea of parallelism, but I hope you start to see kind of the idea of it, and how once you have that in mind and you're looking at the Psalms that way, you start to see, oh wow, there's a lot more here than I even recognized at first. So it just, I remember, you know, when I was first kind of taught about this structure or this structure and all that, how it made my enjoyment of the Psalms just grow by leaps and bounds, because you can kind of see the beauty, and also you just see, man, these writers were skilled. Man, they were really skilled in making these subtle, slight comparisons that that just advance the whole thought of what's going on. So, all right, let me give you a couple teaching tips here, and then we'll wrap things up for tonight. So, teaching tip number one here: don't forget to explain the title. I I forgot to point out that this was written by David until we got into it a little ways. But yeah, sometimes, especially when you run into a title where it mentions some event in the author's life. And most of the time, if we have an event mentioned, it's going to be some event from King David's life. Like if you just flip back and you see Psalm 7 there, you know, it mentions um, of David, which he sang to the Lord concerning the words of Cush, a Benjamite. And you're probably familiar yourself with, you know, other psalms that mention moments from David's life. And those are important to at least touch on briefly if you're going to teach on a psalm, because it often adds some really helpful context for whatever the author might have mentioned in there. And so sometimes it might be necessary for you to just briefly tell the story that's mentioned in the title. Um, I can't remember which one it is exactly, but I remember one of the Psalms, it mentions that, you know, David wrote it after he started to run for his life from King Saul. And there was that incident where David received some help from a priest, and there was a servant of Saul who was there in town and witnessed the priest helping David. And then you might remember after that, that servant went back and told Saul all about it, and Saul killed all of the priests of that man's family. I don't know if that story rings a bell or not, but so stories like that are mentioned in the title. It can be real helpful to, at the very least, just kind of briefly recap what the story is, because it really adds some helpful context there. And then number 2 here, second teaching tip. Consider reading the whole psalm to your students before you analyze it. Consider reading the whole psalm to your students before you analyze it. Kind of like I did this evening, reading the whole thing before we started to look at some of the individual phrases. I both love and almost dread opportunities to teach on the Psalms, because the reason I love it is that, they're so beautiful. The Psalms are so beautiful, and often, just have a message that's so encouraging, so uplifting. It touches your heart and mind all at the same time. But sometimes I also dread it, because they're such beautiful pieces of literature all by themselves. But, when you teach on something, you're supposed to offer some analysis of it, right? You're supposed to kind of take it apart a little bit and, um, talk about what's in there. And sometimes I almost feel like, man, this psalm is so beautiful on its own. By the time I get done talking about it, probably, all the beauty is going to be I'll probably, tarnish the beauty of this thing by whatever I say about it. It's this beautiful work of literature, and here I am, as I'm teaching on it, kind of ripping it apart, and so I guess a better way to say it is, I just never feel like I can really do justice to the beauty of a psalm, and you probably understand what I'm talking about. But if you read the whole thing straight through before you start analyzing it and taking it apart and all that, it's still possible, to give your students a taste of the beauty of the psalm, and so that can be a good thing to do. Maybe not if you're teaching on Psalm 119 or something, because that one's extremely long. But some of these shorter ones, like Psalm 8 tonight, that's just 9 verses long, so not hard to read all the way through that one. But anyway, a couple of tips for you there. But any final thoughts or questions from tonight? Nope. All right. Well, glad you were here, and Lord willing, I'll see you next week. Whoops.